I isolated myself for 30 days. My mind turned against me. I need to tell you something before this story starts. I am not a person who needs people. That is what I believed about myself for most of my adult life. I was the one who left parties early and felt relief on the drive home. The one who canceled plans and slept better for it. The one who said, honestly and without performance, that I preferred my own company to almost anyone else's. I said this so often and so confidently that I never once stopped to test whether it was actually true. This is the story of what happened when I did. The theory: there is a branch of psychology called social baseline theory. The core claim is this: the human brain does not treat social connection as a luxury. It treats it as a biological baseline, as fundamental to survival as food, water, and sleep. When you are isolated from other people, your brain does not simply feel lonely. It enters a threat state. It reads the absence of human contact the same way it reads physical danger, and it begins to respond accordingly. I heard about this at a lecture. The researcher presenting it said something that stuck with me. He said, most people never discover this about themselves because they never remove the thing that the brain is depending on long enough to see what happens when it's gone. I am, as I have mentioned before, the kind of person who needs to find out for themselves. I booked a cabin. The setup: day 0. The cabin was 4 hours from the nearest city. 1 room, 1 bed, 1 wood stove, a porch that looked out over a tree line that went on further than I could see. No internet, no phone signal, a satellite device for emergencies only, which I defined in advance as medical emergency, structural emergency, or the specific scenario in which I was no longer able to assess my own state clearly enough to continue. I brought enough food for 35 days. I brought books, 40 of them, more than I could possibly read because the thought of running out of things to read felt like a different kind of emergency. I brought a journal, 3 of them. I brought a camera, set up on a tripod in the corner, pointed at the chair where I planned to make daily check-ins. The rules were simple: no contact with other human beings for 30 days, no phone, no internet, no letters, no accidental conversations with passing strangers. If I saw another person, a hiker, someone on the road, I was to turn and walk the other way. The experiment required clean isolation, total removal. I drove up on a Saturday morning in early autumn. The light was the kind of clean, particular light that only exists in that season, that specific quality of gold that makes everything look like it means something. I unloaded the car. I watched it disappear down the track. I stood on the porch for a long time. The silence was enormous, not peaceful, enormous. I went inside and made coffee and told myself I was fine. I was fine. Week 1, days 1 through 7. I want to be accurate about the first week because it is important that you understand this part. It was genuinely good. I am not saying this to make what comes later more dramatic. I am saying it because it is true and because it explains something about why the experiment became dangerous in a way I did not anticipate. The first 7 days felt like recovery. I slept well, better than I had in months. I read without distraction. I cooked slowly, deliberately, with attention that daily life never allows. I walked for hours through the tree line and noticed things: the specific texture of bark on different trees, the way sound travels differently when there are no roads nearby, the quality of cold air in the morning that exists only where there is no exhaust, no machinery, no friction of other lives rubbing against yours. By day 5, I had written 40 pages in the journal. Not because I was struggling, because I had space to think, and thinking was producing things I hadn't known were in there. I filmed my check-ins, and I looked, watching them back now, like a person on holiday, relaxed, present, slightly proud of myself. This is what made the second week so disorienting. I had expected difficulty from the start. I had prepared for difficulty from the start. What I had not prepared for was feeling genuinely well for long enough that the arrival of difficulty felt, when it came, not like a predicted stage of the experiment, but like something had changed. Something had shifted. Something was wrong. Week 2, days 8 through 14. Day 8 was the first day I caught myself listening for something that wasn't there. I was reading in the afternoon, mid-afternoon, good light, comfortable chair, when I became aware that I was not fully attending to the page. Some part of my attention was directed outward, toward the door, toward the porch, toward the tree line, listening. Not for anything specific, just listening. in the way you listen when you know you're expecting someone, when you're tracking for the sound of an approach. There was no one coming. I put the book down. I looked at the door. I noted in my journal that something had changed in the quality of my attention, and I did not yet know what it meant. By day 10, the listening had become constant, not intrusive, not frightening, just present, the way tinnitus is present, a background frequency I had not chosen and could not turn off. I was listening for voices, not imaginary voices. I was not hearing things that weren't there. I was listening for the possibility of voices. My brain had identified the absence of human sound as a gap that needed monitoring. Day 11. I made a decision I had not anticipated making. I began talking to myself, not muttering, not thinking aloud, talking. Full sentences, addressed to no one, in a conversational tone, as if responding to questions that hadn't been asked. I described what I was doing while I was doing it. I am making coffee now. I am adding 1 spoon. The water is almost boiling. I narrated my own life back to myself in real time, and what is significant about this is not that it seemed strange. It is that it felt necessary, like pressure relief, like the words had been building up with nowhere to go and had found the only available exit. Day 12. I read the social baseline theory notes I had brought with me. The researcher had written, "The brain, in isolation, begins to treat any available stimulus as a potential social signal. It begins to anthropomorphize. Faces appear in patterns. Voices are heard in ambient sound. This is not pathology. This is the brain running its social detection system at full sensitivity because it has not received confirmation that the social environment is safe." I read this at my desk. Through the window, the tree line moved in the wind. I looked at the tree line for a long time. I wrote in my journal, "I think I am starting to understand what this experiment is actually about." Day 13. I named the wood stove. I want to be precise about this. I did not decide to name the wood stove. I simply noticed, while feeding wood into it one evening, that I had already named it, at some point during the previous days, without making a conscious decision to do so. The name was Harold. I do not know where this came from. Harold was reliable. Harold was warm. Harold did not leave. Day 14, 2 weeks in. I filmed my check-in. In the footage I look fine, tired, slightly raw around the eyes, but present, coherent, functional. I read a paragraph correctly. I do the arithmetic without errors. What the camera does not capture is what I did for an hour before the check-in, which was sit on the porch in the cold and rehearse, in my head, what I was going to say. Not because I was going to lie, because I had realized, somewhere during the second week, that the act of speaking to the camera, of directing words toward something that would carry them outward, toward other people, toward an eventual audience, had become the most important part of my day. I was looking forward to talking to a camera. I noted this in the journal and then sat with it for a long time. Week 3, days 15 through 21. Something shifted in week 3 that I find difficult to describe with precision. The best way I can articulate it is this: I stopped feeling alone and started feeling lonely. These are not the same thing. Alone is a condition. Lonely is a response to a condition. It is the feeling produced when the brain has finally processed the full weight of the absence and decided that the absence is not acceptable. I had felt alone since day 1. I began to feel lonely on day 16. The distinction matters because loneliness, unlike aloneness, is not neutral. It has a physical component. There is a specific sensation, documented in the neuroscience literature, which I had also brought with me, that the body produces in response to social deprivation. It has been described as a dull ache in the chest, which is imprecise but recognizable. What it actually feels like, from the inside, is closer to the sensation of being cold in a specific way that warmth cannot address, a cold that is not about temperature. Day 17. I stopped reading. Not because I ran out of interest. I had 30-something books still unread. I stopped because reading is, at its core, a conversation. It is one person speaking to another across time and distance. And I had reached a point where the one-sidedness of that conversation, the inability to respond, to be heard, to have the exchange go both ways, had become more painful than the silence it was filling. I put the books in a pile in the corner. I looked at them for a while. I apologized to them which I recognize is not a rational thing to do, and which I include here because accuracy matters more to me than dignity. Day 18. The loneliness had a direction now. It wasn't ambient. It pointed. It pointed specifically at the people I had not called before I left, the conversations I had deferred, the messages I had not answered because I would answer them when I got back, when I had more time, when I was less busy. The brain, with nothing else to process, had turned these omissions into a list. It ran the list on a loop. It was not a comfortable list. Day 19. I walked further into the tree line than I had walked before, following a path that I had been aware of since day 2 but had not taken. The path led to a ridge. From the ridge I could see, at a distance of perhaps 4 or 5 miles, the roof of another building, a farmhouse, I thought, or another cabin. I stood and looked at it for a long time. I did not go toward it. The rules were clear. I stood and looked at the roof of that building for perhaps 20 minutes. Then I went back. Day 20. I started writing letters. Not to send. There was no way to send them. Just to write. I wrote to people I had not spoken to in years. I wrote to people I spoke to regularly. I wrote to my closest friend a letter that ran to 11 pages, which I have since read back, and which contains things I have never said aloud to another human being, and am not sure I could. The act of writing the letters was, I can tell you with certainty, the thing that kept week 3 from becoming something worse than it was. Week 3 continued. Days 22 through 25. Day 22. I had a dream. I need to tell you about this dream because it is the moment I consider the true center of the experiment. Not any dramatic external event, but this, a dream so ordinary that its ordinariness was what made it devastating. I dreamed I was in a coffee shop. Not a specific coffee shop, just the generic architecture of one, the kind of place that exists in aggregate memory rather than in specific recollection. There were people around me, not people I knew, just people, strangers with their own conversations, their own cups, their own concerns, occupying space the way people in coffee shops occupy space, which is warmly, collectively, without intention. I was not part of any conversation. I was not interacting with anyone. I was simply present among people, existing in the same space as other humans who were going about their lives. I woke up. The grief of waking up was unlike anything I had experienced in the previous 21 days. It was specific, in total, and it sat on my chest with a weight that I had not been prepared for. I lay in the dark for a long time and did not move. I wrote in my journal. I dreamed about nothing, about a coffee shop full of strangers. I have never missed anything more than I missed that coffee shop full of strangers this morning. Day 23. I read back through the journal from the beginning. What I noticed, tracking across the entries, was the specific moment when the language changed. In the first week, the entries are written in the way you write when you are observing something. After day 12 or 13, they are written in the way you write when you are trying to survive something. The shift is not dramatic. It is completely legible. Day 24. I made a decision that I want to be honest about. I considered stopping. Not because I was in danger. I was not in danger. Because the loneliness had reached a pitch that I can only describe as biological. It was not emotional distress in the way I had experienced emotional distress before. It was physical. It lived in the body. It had weight and texture, and it did not respond to reasoning or distraction or any of the other tools I would normally apply to a difficult feeling. I filmed an unscheduled check-in on day 24. I have watched it back several times. I look, in the footage, like a person who is holding something very heavy and has been holding it for long enough that the effort is becoming visible in the posture, in the face, in the specific way the eyes move. I told the camera, I understand now what this is actually measuring. It isn't measuring whether a person can survive without people. Everyone knows you can survive. It's measuring what survival costs, and the invoice is longer than I expected. Day 25. I went back to the ridge. I looked at the farmhouse roof again. From this distance I could now see, or thought I could see, or wanted to believe I could see, a light in one of the windows. I stood there for a long time. I went back to the cabin. I fed Harold. Week 4. Days 26 through 30. I finished the 30 days. I want to be clear about this because it matters. I did not stop early. I completed the experiment exactly as I had designed it, and I am telling you this not because completion is the point, but because what I experienced in the final 5 days was different from everything that came before it. and I needed to stay to find out what it was. Around day 26, something changed again. The loneliness did not diminish, but I stopped fighting it. I stopped applying strategies to it. I stopped treating it as a problem to be managed and started treating it as information. What the loneliness was telling me was very simple. It was telling me that I had been wrong about myself for a long time. Not wrong in a small way, wrong in the most fundamental way a person can be wrong, about what they actually need versus what they have decided it is acceptable to need. I had spent years building a version of myself that did not require other people. Not because I didn't need them. The experiment had settled that question with a completeness that left no room for argument. But because needing people felt, to me, like a vulnerability I could not afford, like an exposure, like handing something fragile to someone who might not be careful with it. The brain, in 30 days of silence, had dismantled that argument from the inside. Day 27. I read the letters I had written in week 3. I read them slowly, all of them, one after another. I want to tell you what it felt like to read 11 pages written to my closest friend, written in the specific way you write when you know you will not be read, when the page is the only available witness. And to understand, reading it back, that I had never spoken to her with this much honesty in 20 years of friendship. Not because I didn't want to, because I had never given myself permission to need her that much. Day 28. I slept for 11 hours. I ate a meal slowly. I watched the tree line in the evening light, and for the first time in 30 days I did not feel that the silence was enormous. It was just silence. It had lost its threat because I had stopped pretending I didn't notice it. Day 29. Last full day. I filmed a final check-in. I spoke for 20 minutes. I am not going to transcribe all of it here, but I will tell you the last thing I said, which was, the researcher was right. Not about whether you can survive the isolation. You can. But survival and living are not the same category, and the difference between them, it turns out, is other people, specifically, the willingness to let other people matter, the willingness to be changed by them, the willingness to hand them the fragile thing. I have been handing it to Harold the wood stove for 29 days. Harold is warm, and Harold is reliable, and Harold has never once disappointed me. Harold is also not a person. Day 30, Saturday morning. Exactly 1 month after I arrived, I walked out to the car I had arranged to collect me. The driver, a man in his 60s, completely unknown to me, who said good morning and asked if I'd had a good stay, spoke to me for approximately 4 minutes on the drive back to the nearest town. I listened to every word, every single word. I watched his face while he spoke. I was aware of the specific quality of attention I was giving him, total, involuntary, completely beyond my control. And I understood that this was what my brain had been starving for 30 days. Not intimacy, not depth, not the 11-page letters or the 20-minute check-ins or the conversations I'd rehearsed with Harold. Just a stranger saying good morning, just a face, just the basic irreducible evidence that other people exist and are present and are real. I thanked him when he dropped me off, and I meant it in a way that he could not possibly have understood. What I know now, I have been home for 3 weeks. I have slept in my own bed. I have had meals with people I love. I have had the kind of conversations that are nothing. The logistics of daily life, the small useless exchanges that fill the space between more significant things. And I have found myself attending to them with a quality of presence I did not have before. The social baseline theory is correct. The brain does not treat human connection as optional. It treats it as the ground beneath every other function, the thing that everything else stands on. Remove it long enough and you don't discover that you can manage without it. You discover, with a precision that no amount of reading could have given you, exactly how much weight it was carrying. I sent the letters. Not all of them. Some were too private, too raw, written at a pitch that belonged to the cabin and not to the world. But the 11-page letter, I sent that one. She called me the same day she received it. We spoke for 2 hours. She said she had been waiting, without knowing she was waiting, for me to say exactly those things, for longer than either of us had realized. I do not recommend 30 days alone in a cabin. I recommend sending the letter. I should have sent it years ago. The silence would have been so much easier to bear if I had.